Thank you to the CDR Pavilion team for inviting me here to speak today. My name is Glenn Hampson. I'm the Program Director for CDRNet, which stands for the Carbon Dioxide Removal Action Network. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the Vancouver Declaration, and I'll speak for about 20 minutes and then take Q&A afterward, and I'll also check the chat if you'd like to make any comments there. To start, let's see. I'm going to give you a bit of background first so that you can understand our perspective on this problem that we're trying to solve. Almost 10 years ago today, leaders from around the world, 195 nations, adopted the Paris Agreement, which, as you know, promised to hold global average temperatures to, quote, well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and also limit this increase to only 1.5 C if possible. Back in 2015, our climate models showed that we might reach this level by around the year 2040. Well, in fact, last year, in 2024, global average temperatures reached 1.55 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. And according to the WMO, there is now a 70% chance that the 5-year warming trend will be more than 1.5 C. So we have reached our Paris Agreement limits 15 years earlier than expected. The root of the problem, of course, is carbon dioxide. Our natural cycle of the Earth releases and absorbs carbon dioxide around us every day. And the totals have varied over the Earth's history, but today somewhere around 190 billion tons of carbon dioxide gets released every year, mostly through decomposing plants, for example. And most of this gets removed, it gets reabsorbed by our oceans, trees, soils, rocks, grasslands. And this balance more or less held steady especially over the 12,000 year period that human civilization evolved, the Holocene. But since the early 1800s, we developed a real affinity for fossil fuels to power the Industrial Revolution and beyond. And we've been burning an increasing amount of fossil fuels since then. At first, this burning didn't really make much of an impact, or at least we didn't notice the impact, or at least we didn't know what to look for. But in recent years, especially in the past generation, it's become noticeable. And today we pour over 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the air every year. So not only are our planet's natural systems, the oceans, trees, soils, and so forth, unable to soak up all this overflow, they've actually become saturated, increasingly saturated, to the point where they can't even completely absorb natural emissions anymore. As you can see from this blue line, which shows the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, this concentration has gone up over the centuries and has, through the greenhouse effect, trapped more and more heat in our atmosphere. Carbon dioxide isn't the only driver of global warming. Methane currently accounts for about 30% of increases, but it is by far the longest lasting influence. The carbon dioxide that we pump into the air today is going to be around for hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of years. And during this period, it's going to continue to drive global warming. So again, we are here. And the question on the table is, where do we end up? Well, the estimates vary on this. Climate researchers have been surprised constantly in recent years about how quickly global temperatures are increasing. Currently, the policy community has a consensus level of around 2.7 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. But we really don't know for sure. Some estimates put this increase much higher, maybe even 2 degrees centigrade 10 years from now, or 3 degrees by mid-century. These increases might seem tiny. I mean, who cares about 1.5? But the reality is our Earth's climate really balances on a razor's edge. The political compromises of the Paris Agreement aim to hold temperatures to 1.5, but the reality is that even a 1 degree rise would be unsustainable over the long term. The risks of a 2 degree world are immense, and a 4 to 5 degree world is unlivable outside pockets of extreme privilege. We're already at the leading edge of a 1.5 world, and we've seen the impacts all around us. Forest fires that emit immense amounts of smoke back into the air that completely destroy our national defined contribution targets, eroding coastlines, oceans that are continually acidifying, heat that's already unlivable in many parts of the world. And the additional risk here isn't just those impacts, but it's the feedback that these impacts are causing. For example, permafrost that is thawing is releasing huge amounts of methane, which is pushing temperatures even higher. As our oceans become more acidic, they're less able to soak up more carbon dioxide. When ice melts from our polar areas, it exposes darker surfaces that absorb more heat. And as our oceans evaporate more, this evaporation also traps more heat. So these changes could lead to what geologists refer to as tipping points, where it's like pushing our planet off of a cliff. We can change our environment to the point where it won't change back. There are social and economic impacts of these changes as well. A recent study by, I think it was Swiss RE, estimated that major economies of the world could lose close to 20% of their GDP by mid-century due to the mounting impacts of climate change, which means that those economies will be less able to invest in the adaptation measures that we'll need. And adaptation is going to be critical because food production is going to drop, fresh water sources are going to dry up, our oceans are going to become inhospitable to life, and migration on a nation scale level is going to become a reality due to extreme heat. As you can see on the charts on the right, the bottom chart shows a 4 to 5 degree world in the year 2100, and most of the equatorial parts of the world are unlivable. Red indicates lethal heat and humidity. So this is all very depressing, and it's caused climate anxiety throughout the world. Our inability to understand how to deal with this, and our sense of how tragic the outcomes could be. And this anxiety is almost in some quarters ecological fatalism, basically, that feeds back into our climate policy and makes us think that maybe we can't do anything and shouldn't do anything. And in fact, some of the more prominent voices in our world today are like Bill Gates in his recent memo are inclined to note that in our world of scarce resources, maybe the best thing that we should do is focus on helping people cope with the coming changes rather than trying to stop these changes. Unfortunately, the flaw in this logic is that the assumption that these coming changes will even be survivable. Civilization might not end, but we can't simply ignore the reality that we're facing. To do so should be unthinkable, really, to all of us. So all this said, is this eco-fatalism justified? Can we even save our planet? We are the first generation, really, to fully understand this crisis, and we're quite possibly the last with the power to stop it. Climate repair is no longer something that would be nice to do. It's an urgent requirement. But can we solve this puzzle? And can we solve it in time? And do we even know where to begin? So here's where we can start to get a little bit more optimistic. There is a solution, and it's divided into 3 parts. The first part is to recognize that carbon dioxide removal, CDR for short, has a vital role to play in the future of global climate policy. This isn't new. We knew this day was coming. The clear need for and the logic behind CDR has been spelled out in every IPCC report since the early 90s, since the first reports. What's different today is that we just need to develop this capacity a lot sooner than the IPCC originally estimated. And we also need to remove more carbon dioxide than was originally estimated because we've missed our emission targets over the decades. And this delay has meant that we'll need to remove a lot more than we originally thought. It's important to know as we make this paradigm shift in policy that there is no climate repair without CDR. Even if we reduce emissions to zero tomorrow, we still wouldn't be addressing the need to remove the legacy pollution that has accumulated over our atmosphere over the centuries. Recall that graph about the increasing concentrations. That carbon dioxide will remain in our atmosphere and continue to drive global temperatures for millennia to come. So if we actually want to stop temperature increases or restore temperatures to their natural levels, then CDR is the only way to accomplish this. Adding CDR also helps us reach our net zero goals more quickly, which will reduce the damage being caused by warming temperatures. And this is especially important given the fraud that's currently happening in our net zero calculations, where we use a lot of accounting gimmicks instead of actually removing carbon emissions. This shift will be a challenge to conventional wisdom, which holds that CDR is like giving polluters a get out of jail free card. And in fact, it isn't. That's a 1990s mindset that we need to move beyond because, again, this is an imperative today. It's not something nice. It's something that needs to be done. We also need to realize that the public supports this action, not only aggressive climate action, but specifically action on CDR. So elevating the role of CDR is not a politically risky move today. It's quite the opposite, in fact. It's also important to note that adding this new pillar to our climate policy portfolio doesn't mean removing existing pillars like emissions reduction, energy transition, adaptation, and so forth. These are all important focus points. But our support over the years hasn't been equally divided. So, for example, the IPCC groups removals and reductions together under the broad heading of mitigation, but in practice, the reduction element, not removals, has received almost all of our mitigation attention. And removals has been relegated to basically paragraph 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. So adding CDR as a new climate policy pillar unto itself will mean giving it much more policy attention than it gets now. It will also mean new offices for CDR because in addition to this policy deficiency, there's an institutional deficiency. The responsibility for carbon removals is fragmented across countries. In some countries, it's a few specialists in the environment ministry. In other countries, it's a few specialists in the energy ministry working on industry mitigation measures. And in other countries, there's no one overseeing CDR at all. And this fragmentation means that there's no government-wide expertise on CDR in some countries, no influence on CDR, limited funding and planning capacity, no shared language between countries, and there's no built-in framework for global coordination on CDR. So when we establish CDR as a pillar, we also need to establish stronger and more uniform institutional structures around the world. There are many types of carbon removal solutions that are available to us. It's important to note, however, that not all of these solutions actually reduce current CO2 levels. Some of these solutions, for example, they pull CO2 out of decaying vegetation in a process that's known as biochar and prevent it from being released into the atmosphere. Or they will bury industrial emissions at the source, a process known as carbon capture and storage, or CCS. These are all beautiful. They're valuable in our fight against global warming, but reducing the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere will require solutions that permanently pull CO2 out of the air, like direct air capture, and not just delay its re-release. And while temporary removal solutions like trees, for example, are great and easy to get at, they aren't very permanent. And trees are prone to burn in our increasingly hot climate. So permanence is also an important consideration. All this said, lots of solutions, lots of momentum in this space, but we have a long way to go. Today, all of our intentionally enhanced carbon sinks combined absorb only about 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually. And almost all of this comes from natural approaches like forests and soil. The novel methods, so-called, like direct air capture, only account for a few million tons of removal annually. By whatever methods we choose to put in our portfolios, and different methods are going to work better in different regions. The most recent State of CDR report estimates that we'll need to remove somewhere between 7 and 9 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually by mid-century, continuing until at least the end of the century. The good news is that we know CDR works. It works very well. Natural carbon sinks are what keeps our planet in balance now. And during the long geological history of the Earth, they've kept the Earth from becoming a hothouse, turn it into a snowball, back and forth. Mechanisms like algae blooms and rock weathering are very effective. The challenge for today is to recognize the urgency of our crisis and act with honesty and integrity to actually reduce carbon levels and not just pretend to act for the sake of carbon credits. We also need to move with haste toward our net zero and net negative goals so we can avoid a situation where we need to quickly deploy untested measures to save our planet. The sooner we can develop and test our preferred solutions, the better off we'll be. So what exactly do we do? Well, this is part 2. We come up with an action plan. But where to start? We know that we need to massively scale CDR as soon as possible, but do it in a way that's safe, sound, doesn't create a new world of unintended consequences. There are already hundreds of companies working on this challenge, including many philanthropies, think tanks, governments, and global coordinating efforts. But this work isn't concentrated. There isn't a single goal for this work. There's no organizing body. There's no mobilizing plan of action. And as mentioned earlier, there's no policy focus or institutional uniformity across countries. So policymakers who want to engage in CDR are understandably confused about what to do, about what efforts and organizations to support and what measures to take. Sort of by default, we've been waiting for the UN to act, but is this the best course of action? Can we maybe also move forward now in partnership with the UN and other members of a coalition of the willing? And this is where CEDRANET comes in. About a year ago and continuing until almost this summer, around 250 high-level experts from climate policy, climate research, industry leaders, environmental leaders, government leaders, representing dozens of countries and hundreds of institutions, met together online to talk about what global policy for CDR should look like. And the outcome was the Vancouver Declaration, which we named in honor of the city where this declaration will be signed next year. The Vancouver Declaration has 2 parts. The first part is the declaration itself, which resolves to act together on urgent CDR deployment. And the second part is the framework, the policy framework, non-binding, but it provides initial guidance on things like science and innovation, finance and markets, governance and accountability, risk, and so forth. This is the entirety of the declaration itself. The left column is the preamble. The bottom right is the closing, and the bolded text and the top right is the core of the declaration, which is, by this declaration and on behalf of all people everywhere, we, the undersigned, pledge to engage in this global challenge together, across borders and in common cause, to develop CDR as a critical complement to emission reduction. We will support ongoing climate action while advancing climate research, accelerating innovation, and building the infrastructure, institutions, and governance mechanisms needed for the urgent, responsible, and equitable removal of excess carbon dioxide from our planet's atmosphere. The framework, which you can read in its entirety on the CDRNet website, is again advisory only. This part won't be signed, but it's a first draft for consideration so that signatories have a starting point for discussion. The top 10 priorities of this declaration are to, one, as discussed, position CDR as a core pillar of our future climate policy. Two, strengthen government leadership in early action, infrastructure, investment, and reform. Three, create a globally coordinated CDR system. Four, advanced next generation markets and financial tools. Five, establish credible MRV standards. Six, establish the economic benefits of CDR, which are enormous. We're not even going to talk about these in this presentation. Seven, understand that there are risks and rewards involved here. We have to figure out the right balance. And then 8, 9, and 10, we need to center equity, public engagement, and legitimacy in this effort. Make sure that we support innovation with integrity, safeguards, and then finally ensure that CDR reinforces, as discussed, the other pillars, doesn't replace things like emission reduction. What this declaration does, in effect, is connect the dots in the CDR ecosystem. It unites us into something more than just the sum of our parts. It's not an effort to reinvent the wheel, but to unify the ecosystem in common cause. So by adopting this declaration, countries can better deploy, for example, the technical solutions that get developed by organizations like Mission Innovation, and we can better benefit from the market catalyzation work that organizations like Climate Champions are doing, and help fulfill the commitments that are made through organizations like the Carbon Management Challenge. This is a first for CDR. The Vancouver Declaration is the first global agreement that focuses solely on the challenge of carbon removal. And it's also the first agreement that treats carbon removal as a key pillar in our fight against global warming, not just an afterthought to existing policy. There are three animating themes behind this effort. One is that the CDRNet participants didn't want to build something that was just ornamental. It's an actual plan for engagement that centers around building actual pathways for action. The second is that we're bringing government involvement to the forefront instead of focusing only on markets. And this is a necessary change because throughout the course of history, governments have always played a critical role in helping the private sector solve social, economic, and industrial challenges, like bringing out railroads and highways and the internet. And third, it's a soft law-based mechanism. It's not treaty-based. So it's fast, flexible, and then easily adaptable and adoptable by countries, and will be able to evolve with science and experience. There's real strength in the diversity of this approach. It unites all stakeholders. It's not just industry groups working alone, but industry working together with government, research, funders, civil society. It addresses all the challenges in CDR, not just market standards, but everything. It includes all CDR approaches, so not just things like direct air capture or trees, but natural and engineered solutions. And it's a broad, achievable, sustainable framework for collaboration. And importantly, it also takes head-on the moral imperative of this situation. With the Vancouver Declaration, we recognize head-on that the moral imperative is real for immediate action on carbon removal. The closest historical parallel might be the Helsinki Declaration for Medical Ethics, which was created by the World Medical Association in 1964. And that declaration created the first ever shared framework for medical research ethics. Before that period, hard to believe, there was no uniform definition of what medical ethics looked like in the world. And this declaration put that definition forward, and it's since then it's been adopted by all countries and organizations and regularly updated. So the parallel is that the Vancouver Declaration would bring that same sort of moral focus to this challenge and allow it to be adopted and modified over the years. The declaration will be signed in Vancouver October 21st of next year. And between now and then, we're reaching out to potential signatories and also pursuing other pre-signing work that's aligned with goals and needs. So step one, part one, establish CDR as the pillar, as an additional pillar in our climate policy. Step two, create a framework for working together on that, the Vancouver Declaration. And part three is figuring out how to make that declaration more than just signatures on a page. And this is the build this plane as we fly it part of the solution. The coalition of countries and IGOs who will sign the Vancouver Declaration understand what's at stake and will agree to work together quickly to decide how to scale this effort the best way possible. We don't have the luxury of another 30 years, really, to keep debating this. Do we have enough expertise now? No. Do we have the answers? No, but we have enough to get started. And we can learn more as we go along. The signing of this effort will just be the beginning. Again, it's not, the goal isn't just to have people sign the paper, it's to start a process. It will be the beginning of a decades-long journey to unite countries in common cause to save our planet. The ideal near-term outcomes are numerous. One, we would hope that more countries would begin working together directly on CDR, that these countries will build a robust organization, whether that's CDRNet or something else, that can help fast-track actions between governments, that as a result of this collaboration, the public enthusiasm for CDR is sparked, which will lead to more CDR growth that expands well beyond the seeds that we plant with this effort. And that in short order, gigaton scale removal won't be a fantasy. It will come well within reach. And then in the hopefully not too distant future, we could start talking about these sorts of outcomes, that global carbon dioxide concentrations start to stabilize, which will give us more ability to predict what kinds of adaptation measures we'll need in the future, that we can actually begin drawing down CO2 concentrations and establish a real credible route to restoring our Earth's climate to its natural conditions, that climate-related suffering from heat to disease will drop, while conversely, the climate-stabilized prosperity will grow. We can hope that by adding this pathway to climate change control, we can attract more enthusiasm and engagement in participating in climate policy. Each country can find the right mix of approaches that work best, but all roads can lead to, more assuredly, to a net zero and net negative outcomes. We can even hope that we'll be at the leading edge of establishing a robust new carbon removal industry and start to reap the benefits of that. And finally, perhaps the pathways that we forge here can be helpful in other types of global cooperation and climate and elsewhere. The Vancouver Declaration and the CDRNet related work are going to continue to grow over the years. We'll have annual conferences that will play a major role in this evolution. We'll start looking for a spot for CDR 27 sometime in the spring. And at these meetings, the CDR stakeholders will convene to showcase the latest in global action on CDR and also contribute to the continued growth of the Vancouver Declaration process and partnerships. Finally, different ways that you can engage in this process. You can nominate people who we can keep in touch with as this process unfolds. You may choose to officially sign the declaration now or commit to signing it in Vancouver in October of 26. You can attend the conference to learn more. Speaking slots are also available. You can help financially support the conference and or CedroNet, or you can join the discussion and help shape the long-term governance structure of CedroNet. If you'd like more information, please take a look at the CedroNet website, or please give me an email anytime. Happy to set up a call to chat. And then in the annex section here are a few selected reading materials. There's also links in the presentation, which will be made available. That is all I have to say this morning. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for being here, and hope to see you in Vancouver. And at this point, I will stop sharing my screen and be happy to take any questions you might have.
All participants now have access to microphone or camera in case they want to ask something live.
Yeah.
Otherwise, use the chat, please.
I will check the chat as well and see if there's... Well, Anna, I am available, as I said, by email. Happy to take questions at any time. Just go ahead and send me that. Do you know when the slides will be available, or should I go ahead and just make them available on our website?
Feel free to make them available on your website.
Okay.
After COP30 is over, we will have the dedicated section on our website as well, where you
wonderful.
can find all materials and recordings from the virtual conference.
Yes. Okay, I will do that. So for those in attendance, give me half a day or so, and I'll make these slides available on the website. And again, just go ahead and email me if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for participating. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.